Shirley Clark.
Shirley Clark was a dear friend. We used to go and hang
Shirley.
out. And Wendy Clark, I knew her daughter.
I know both of them.
Yeah.
Somebody was doing a program on Shirley Clark.
Shirley
I think
Clark.
The Center for Communication.
Yeah. See, it's a small world.
Shirley did a documentary on a guy named Jason, who was an African American, and in those days, homosexual was barely, discussed.
30 seconds to air, so let's go.
30 seconds?
To air, yeah.
Okay, we're close.
At El Quijote, I used to go in there, and that was the restaurant.
Yeah.
And there'd be people there, and I was never there when there wasn't a fight. But it would be a fight like this. You'd be eating, and they're having lobster or something, and you'd hear, rah, 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 and then they say, you wouldn't understand a poem if it hit you right between the eyes. It was a, art fight going on. Okay, welcome very, very much to Conversation. It's a pleasure to have, if I may say so, a legendary figure, certainly in the field of multimedia communication, one who has had an incredibly wide range of people that he's been in touch with in association with institutions within the communications industry writ large, also within academia, and that is Sumner.Jules Glimcher. And Sumner, it's so good to see you again and welcome you to the set here at our new studio on 104th Street.
Harold, what a pleasure to be here again. You are the best interviewer.
You think so? Well, I would like to think, I appreciate that. I would take anything from you would be an accolade that I'd be more than happy to accept and so forth. But it's not really, it's a conversation. I think there's a difference between a conversation and an interview, I think. An interview is more structured. And I don't think we're terribly structured because we're ready to sort of talk off the top of our heads in a spontaneous way.
You ask me what you want to talk about and we'll go.
Well, listen, all we have to do is say, go. Now, talking, born and raised, I know you did nuclear physics at Harvard and so forth, but you've been in the industry, and talk about a little bit of your own background from your own, share with the audience.
In one or two sentences, I grew up in Boston. Went into the Army in 1943, came out in 1946, started Harvard, was there for 2 years because I had had previous trainings at Army Specialized Training Program, was graduated with a class of 48, and in January 1949 was ready for the big time.
Yeah.
And came to New York, and I got a job in January of 1949 as a page at NBC.
NBC Television, which was golden age.
Yeah, I began actually in radio, and then before I knew it, I was in television. And I spent 6 years at NBC. When I started at NBC, this will appall young viewers today. When I started at NBC, we went on the air at 5:30 in the afternoon with a show called Howdy Doody.
Howdy Doody, I remember it well.
And then we finished with a show called Lights Out at 9:30 p.m. Our entire broadcast day was 4 hours.
Right.
And the rest of the day, on your television set was a bullseye. It was called the test pattern.
I can remember
and
that.
You were supposed to focus.
Yes. Didn't they have one that was an Indian head? I remember.
And it was all black and white.
Yeah, it was of course all black
12
and white.
inches.
Yeah, right.
And then Pat Weaver came along.
Yeah, okay.
A couple of years later, and instead of starting at 5:30, he put us on the air around 3 o'clock with a cooking show.
Yeah.
And then around noon with a home show.
Yeah.
And one day he called me into his office and he said, Sumner, I'm starting a show called The Today Show. It's coming out of Chicago with a man named Dave Garroway.
Right.
And it's going to start at 7 in the morning.
Wow.
I had to go out and hire 12 ADs. And nobody had an experience in television because it was so brand new.
AD is what now?
Assistant Director.
Assistant Director,
and I hired them off the street.
Off the street.
And you learn when you learn by
pants.
doing.
Yeah.
So I spent what was 6 years from 1949 to 1954 at NBC, and was constantly being promoted because everything was expanding.
Did it hit you right? You had done Harvard and all that, the Army, and it hit you that you were happy in that position.
Oh, I loved it.
It was an exciting time.
Harold,
you were young and strong and all
Harold,
that.
let me tell you. in addition to the professional aspects, being in on really the ground floor, I worked with every show that came out of New York.
Including the show-of shows?
I was production manager for 1 year.
I'll be darned.
Working with Sid Caesar, Carl Reiner, Mel Brooks, you know, the whole gang. But aside from the professionalism, let me tell you about the fun we had.
Yes, I'll tell you. With that crowd, you couldn't miss.
Well, we started with my first few months as a page. There were 50 pages who were executive trainees, guys, and there were 50 guides, and the guides were girls, and they were hired for their attractiveness, you know, to be honest.
The girls were.
The girl guides, and they took tours of the studios, and we let people into the studios. Like, I volunteered to work on weekends because I love music. And the hottest tickets in town, all tickets for radio and TV shows were free. Arturo Toscanini led a 100-piece NBC orchestra every Sunday afternoon. And the hottest tickets in town, in Studio 8H, which is now where Saturday Night Live comes from, the hottest tickets in town would be for the Sunday Toscanini shows. These were given away free. But General Sarnoff, who was the head of NBC, of course, his favorite friends got the even better tickets. They got tickets for the dress rehearsal on Saturday.
That's better?
On I volunteered to work on weekends so I could let the audiences into 8H and watch Toscanini. And of course the rehearsals were better because this genius would stand up, and if a musician hit a wrong note, you would get a stream of Italian vindictive and batons tossed across the room. I mean, this guy was so amazing. So I used to love to work weekends. Now,
that was in David Sarnoff?
David Sarnoff, who was known as General Sarnoff. He was an honorary general.
And William Paley was working over at the CBS, this NBC, right.
But life with the guides and the pages, socially, there were 50 of each, and the girls were just glorious. And we used to party every single night.
Isn't it great?
And the little bit of the cream on the topping was in addition to the 50 girl guides who paired off with the 50 boy what were you, pages. There was a guy named Phil Sharrig who was a composer, and he had a penthouse. And every Saturday night when the shows were over, 11 o'clock, all the showgirls and guys would convene in his penthouse.
Oh, wow.
And we had parties.
Party hardy, they say,
And then we had what was called the Actors Lounge on the 3rd floor. Now, this was the days before cell phones. So
of course,
performers had services, what they call services. So if you were an actor, and the two I remember very well were Eva Marie Saint and Joanne Woodward, they would come up to the third floor. Well, they weren't big names.
They were not. Okay.
Not in 1949.
Nobody knew them. 49, my lord. Yeah, so way back.
We had a lounge that was air conditioned in the summer and heated in the winter, and people like Eva Marie this is where they would hang out and wait for calls from their agents to find out if they were going on a casting call.
That would be casting call for television or film?
No, this was
film?
For radio.
Radio. Okay, coming out of radio.
The third floor had about 4 studios, 3A, 3B, 3C, 3. I just noticed, just a few months ago, there was an obituary for a woman named Rosa Rio. Rosa Rio played the organ, and she would go from 3A to 3B, all these soap operas that were on, 15-minute soap operas that were on every day.
That would have carried over from the 30s in radio,
and this is what my parents used to listen to on radio.
I remember them. They used to have one called Portia Faces Life. Do you remember that? And they had another one. They had another one.
One Man's Family.
One Man's Family. And they had another one, Just Plain Bill.
Yes. Yeah, and there was Bobby Benson and the H.O. Corral and the Shadow.
And of course the Shadow and the Lone Ranger.
The Lone Ranger.
Yeah, and those were listened to religiously on the radio.
And I used to listen to them myself. I remember I think it was before I got down to NBC when I was listening to the radio. I think it was in the 30s when suddenly they interrupted a program on CBS with an invasion from Mars. Do you remember that?
That was the
Orson Welles.
That Orson Welles. Yeah,
That
scares
was-
the daylights out of everybody.
Oh my God! Everybody believed it
Yeah.
because the announcers were so. You know, you heard this voice in the middle. We interrupt this program because we have a news announcement. A rocket has just landed in New Jersey.
Yeah, right.
And people got in their cars and began to drive. They didn't
Right.
know where they were
Yeah,
going,
yeah,
but
yeah.
oh, the early days of broadcasting were
It
magnificent.
was fun, huh?
Yeah.
And then they talk a little bit about show of shows, because you were around those people, and they
Well,
would
in
be
addition-
they'd be doing the rehearsals, and guffaws of great joy were coming out when they were getting ready to
Yeah,
put it
in
on.
addition
and what
to-
talent there was! That show of shows was absolutely fantastic.
In addition to when I first worked on it, when it was at NBC, and Max Liebman was the producer.
Okay, I didn't know
When
that. Yeah.
After I left NBC, I went to Radio Free Europe in Munich and
Okay.
spent 3 years there. Had a very interesting time, and I came up with the idea of creating an independent international voice news service.
It's worth mentioning that if I do, because you were talking you traveled a great deal in Europe.
I
and
traveled
had
everywhere.
Yeah,
everywhere.
yeah. Okay, you
And
had a lot
I
of
lived-
experience
I lived
with.
for 3 years in Munich, and
3
that,
years, long time,
and that
yeah.
was an enormously interesting.
That was Radio Free Europe.
Oh
right?
my God!
Yeah.
From 1954 through 57, we're living on American salaries and European costs. Harold, I cannot tell you.
It was like, yeah.
It's the only time in my life I felt rich. We had. My wife and I were just married.
Yeah.
We had no children.
Right.
We had a tiny flat that was free.
Yeah.
And we had to have a maid because we did a lot of entertaining. Our maid cost us $10 a month. A month, not a week. A month. We could buy cigarettes. Everybody smoked.
Yeah,
But
everybody
the PX
smoked,
for
yeah.
10 cents a
Right.
pack. Gasoline was $10 cents a gallon.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
You would go to a bed and breakfast to ski, and it would cost $10 per person for the bed and breakfast for the night. But that included dinner beforehand.
Blue plate special.
I'm sorry, not 10. It was $5.
Yeah. Right.
So if I took my wife, our weekend would cost us $10
Yeah.
plus a little bit for lunch on the way.
Such extravagance. Huh?
We stayed at the finest hotels
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Paris. We ate at La Perouse and La Perouse, and we ate at the.
But you were still in communications, and then when you came
well,
back,
Radio
you
for
said,
Europe was communication.
"Yeah, absolutely." And you traveled all over, and you got really knowledgeable, and knew a lot of people. And then you came back here,
And
and
I-
you set up a precursor to what was to become CNN
Yes,
and the
it-
World of News.
It was an independent news service for radio, although CBS liked it so much in Washington. WTOP, the CBS station owned by the Grahams, their radio station bought it, and then they would put my news program over still images because my news was better than CBS.
Good
it was
for you,
It
yeah.
was a fabulous period. Just
yeah,
an
yeah,
incredible period.
yeah.
So that was one of the best ideas I ever had. So I came back, and it was after I came back.
Did that you say it was a precursor to CNN?
Yes,
Did the entities continue or no? Or
Yes, it was. When I lost control of it because I had no business experience and no money.
Yeah.
United Press International took it
Oh,
over.
UPI.
It
yeah.
became known as UPI Audio and became
Audio.
world famous and made a lot of money for UPI.
Congratulations, congratulations! Another sterling event in
Well,
the
it was great fun.
checkered career of
So
Mr.
I come back
Glimcher.
from Munich, and I hear that Sid Caesar had gone to ABC with a new producer, a man named Hal Janis, and he was looking for a production manager. So I knew Hal, and he hired me right away.
Yeah, because you had made acquaintances all along at all these levels, very deep
I knew
acquaintances.
everybody
You knew
in-
everybody.
everybody
yeah.
at
And everybody
NBC.
knew you. Yeah. Yeah. Well.
Anyhow,
Yeah.
so I spent one season as production manager, and the gang would come in. Think of this as a dream job, right? I'd come into the office. I was living at the Park Vendôme on 57th Street, and Sid's office was on 57th Street, just west of Fifth Avenue. I think it was number 6 West 57th. We'd come into the office in the morning. Carl Reiner, Mel Brooks, Neil Simon, Sid would all go into Sid's office and close the door, and the whole morning you would listen to them, laughing as they were trying to. Then we had lunch, and then in the afternoon, all the employees would assemble in the rehearsal room, and Sid and Imogene and who was he?
Imogene Coca then?
Imogene.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, Imogene Coca.
They would go through their procedures, their bits, and it was the job of the staff to listen and let them refine their timing. I made one terrible mistake at one time. I thought of myself as being fairly intelligent, so I'm listening to this routine, and when it's over, I go over to Sid and I say, Sid, if you paused just a second before you say the word, whatever that word was, I think it would get a better laugh.
Well, that's the kind of thing they would want you to say. You told them the truth. Right. Yeah.
So anyhow, he looked at me and he walked over to Hal, talked to Hal, and Hal came over to me and said, Sumner, nobody tells Sid what to do. If you have a suggestion, you tell me or one of the writers. Was I put in my place.
Oh, really?
So Sid was a very strange guy.
Was he really?
Well, he was a genius.
Yeah, he was.
I have never met a man who was so talented in my life, but he was very strange.
Strange in a psychological or interpersonal way, right?
He could not take criticism.
Could not? Okay.
Absolutely.
Interesting,
I mean, he took a suggestion as being negative. I wasn't trying to be negative.
No, obviously.
I think if you pause here...
He was serious.
Yeah.
They'd be upset with that.
Yeah, he was
That's really an odd sort of quirk, Yeah.
So I just love broadcasting because broadcasting... I was mistaken about it. When I left Harvard, I thought that education was the most important thing in the world. And I thought that radio, which was in its heyday, and television, which was approaching its heyday, would be an instrument for educating the public.
I know.
I mean, I felt, and of course I feel what you guys are doing in public access.
Thank you.
And what PBS is doing, everything else is so horrid.
It does seem that way to me, so vapid, chasing Nielsen, all that kind of stuff.
It's vapid, and it's economically centered. It's what show will make the most money. What is the lowest common denominator? How can we deal with the stupidest fifth of the
was there any of that kind of permeating thing at the very beginning, or did you find it even at the top levels there was a sense of mission and purpose and something a little more?
Not at the top levels of commercial broadcasting. I was fortunate.
Not even Mr. Sarnoff.
I was lucky enough to spend a couple of years at PBS. I was, because of my international knowledge, I was the producer in charge of international acquisitions, and I brought some very interesting programs to this country, of which I'm very proud. I started an international exchange with NHK. NHK, which stands for Nippon Hoso Kyokai in Japan, is the PBS of Japan. I imported people from the Film Board of Canada, National Film Board of Canada.
Great institution.
They made 2 films on Glenn Gould. One was called Glenn Gould on the Record. The other was called Glenn Gould Off the Record. I think I bought them for $1,000 each. I imported the first film on Leonard Cohen. I knew his work, and the CBC made the National Film Board made a fabulous film. I think it was called Introducing Mr. Leonard Cohen, and I brought these programs to this country.
Very good.
Because of my knowledge of international broadcasting.
And that was from the National Canadian Film Board?
The National Film Board of Canada.
Somebody else who knew the Film Board.
There were 2 institutions: the National Film Board of Canada and the CBC, Corporation for Canadian Broadcasting. I bought 9 films from Norddeutsche Rundfunk in Germany on East Asia. They were in German, and they were 45 minutes in length, so I had to buy the programs, get M&E tracks, and do work prints.
What is it?
Had them translated into English, I bought those for the PBS, but they had no production facilities. And I remember a close friend of mine named Garnet Garrison had gone to the University of Michigan, which, by the way, happens to be an enormously forward-looking school.
Thank you. That's the school that is associated with my whole family. My daddy was there in the law school, and my grandmother was the first woman ever to graduate from the University of Michigan Medical College way back in 1888.
Wow.
Broke the glass ceiling.
Wow. Let me tell you about...
So we're rooted in Ann Arbor, you know,
well,
the family.
I loved Ann Arbor because I was fortunate enough in 2005 to be hired by Alfred Taubman's family. You probably know Alfred.
No.
Well, he's an amazing man, and Alfred went to the University of Michigan, majored in architecture, and his expertise turned out to be how people interact with buildings.
Wow.
And his family hired me in 2005 to do a 1-hour video portrait of him. And I met one of the most amazing men in my life. Now, Alfred expertise is knowing how buildings interact with people.
Yeah.
And he made a fortune building the best malls in America.
Wow.
One of the local...
That's right.
One of the
That's
local
right.
one is the Short Hills Mall here in New Jersey. Now, Alfred made a fortune. When he hired me, he was listed in Forbes magazine as one of the richest men in America.
He hired you as what?
To produce, his children hired me to produce a video portrait of him for his family only.
And where was his? Had he passed then, or what?
Say again?
Had he passed, or was
No,
he
no,
still?
he's alive today.
Oh, good. Okay, yeah.
He's alive today. He is he will be 89 next month, and he's one of the most interesting men you've ever met.
That's
he's brilliant.
Right.
So his kids hired me to do a video portrait. I was supposed to do a 1-hour video portrait, but as I interviewed his 9 children, his 3 children and 9 grandchildren, and his colleagues, 36 of his colleagues, I couldn't fit him into an hour. It ended up as a 2-hour program that took me 3 years to make.
Wow.
And I met some of the most incredible people, some of his friends.
You have met incredible people through your whole life, and it continues.
Well,
you just met Howard Bloom.
Oh, isn't Howard?
Isn't he a wonderful guy?
Howard is something.
Yeah, we did a program with him in this studio last week. Yeah.
Well, Howard has written a book for those listeners or viewers who haven't seen or heard of him. I have to tell you, Howard is one of the most amazing people who ever lived.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called The God Problem because, you know, he doesn't believe in God because so many other people, when you begin to think, if there is a God, right?
Yeah.
If there's a God, the God made the world. Who made God? Or where did God come from?
Yeah, yeah.
If there isn't a God, who made wherever we are?
Yeah.
How did the universe start? You know,
a central question that has confronted our self-reflective consciousness to ask these questions in a unique kind of way, one could suggest.
Well, Howard,
the Homo sapiens species,
let me suggest to anyone who doesn't know, get Howard's book. It's called The God Problem.
And it's subtitled, if I may, it's subtitled, How a Godless Cosmos Creates.
Yeah.
Which is sort of asking the really big questions, you know.
Can I say a word about my book?
By all means, sir. All means. All means do.
So Howard,
I'll hold it up.
This great book.
Okay. Let me hold it up to a camera and they can come in.
All right.
I'll hold it. You talk to it.
All right. This book is
I'll hold it up. You can come in tight on this, fellas.
It's called A Filmmaker's Journal, and it's a memoir.
Maybe you can come in tighter if you can. Okay, go ahead.
It's a memoir, and to me, the most interesting thing about it is that I wrote it originally as an electronic book.
Okay, now wait a minute. Let's get this.
Like Jane Fonda, who is one of the most engaging people I ever met.
What can we do? Can you show this to a camera somehow? Can you come in tight on this camera? Or let's say, maybe you could try it here. Could you? No, on this camera. If you can sort of go this way and talk to it, right?
Is it this way?
Yeah, there you go. Okay, yeah, that's Jane Fonda, right.
All right, now, The thing about this is called an enhanced electronic book. And what that means is that when you buy it on an iPad, which I urge anybody to do.
Yeah, I know, you're really a fan, yeah.
You can take this book and you're reading it, and you can navigate.
Keep in mind it on the camera if you can.
I'm trying.
Okay, yeah.
I'm trying now. To navigate in this book, I have to hold it here just to do it. You touch this. It's all right, and then you have chapters, and when you touch a dot, it takes you to a new chapter.
Amazing.
This is the most progressive thing that's happening.
And you can have videos embedded in that?
Well, let me just
and pictures? I mean, it's really something. It really is. It's a whole new thing in terms of publishing, yeah.
Because you can have tremendous amounts of information in a book, including video, and so I was able to this is Bob. I met Bob Hope at one time when I was
the Bob Hope, yeah.
Well, the one and only. I was covering the political conventions in 1952, and Bob Hope was there. Now, here's the Love Boat. I lectured on the Love Boat.
Yes, I know you did, yeah. Yeah, that's right, because you've done high-end tours of lecturing.
I lectured on 11 cruise ships.
Somebody, Fairbanks, or who's the famous writer on China?
John King Fairbanks.
He was going to come to do one, and he couldn't do it, and so they called you, and you went, and you go and do lectures. That must be that's more recent, I think. That must be a very good way to live.
But let me tell you about...
I mean, you've had an incredibly good
I've
life.
been very lucky, but look at this. You're reading a book,
right? That's right.
And you see a play arrow.
Yeah. And it comes up. I mean, it's like magic, isn't it? Yeah. Isn't that magic? Yeah. See, yeah, right. And it's all built into a thing you can carry around. And they're going to have one of these things. I saw a thing that it's going to fold up. It'll be folded up like a roll. You can put it in your pocket. That's coming over the horizon.
I don't know that, but
because the bandwidth is expanding exponentially.
And this is amazing. When you close it, it turns it off. And Steve Jobs, who did everything, read his book if you haven't. You know, it was written. It was written by
Isaacson. Was it Isaacson?
Isaacson.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs was, I guess, one of the
Did you ever meet him?
Of the world. I never met Steve Jobs, but I have read the book. You can put on an iPad, I think it's 3,000 movies and 50,000 books. I go, if I'm traveling, I don't take books. You take this. I have about 6 or 8 books, including Howard's book that I'm reading. And this one little gadget, it will give you can have so many things on it. It has twice the reading area of the Nook or the Kindle. It is just amazing.
So that's your recommendation, hands down, right?
From
your experience.
If you're buying a tablet, it costs more. But you know, Harold, forget money. Quality. You want the best you can get.
Well, yeah, sure, if you can.
So it costs a little more, but if you amortize it over a couple of years, it's pennies.
Yeah, and also when you think about where it's going, because these things are happening, like the Turing machine goes back. I mean, the computing just goes very slow, and then it just goes, and now it's going exponential.
Don't you love
it's
computers?
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's amazing. I like Kurzweil. He writes well on it and the implications of it, but it's going into amazing dimensions.
The artificial intelligence,
the AI, all that kind of stuff that's
going. The whole world is changing.
I know.
So
very, very rapidly.
Yeah.
I mean, because we were born into an earlier time when things were going slow, and then that was even slower and slower throughout 200,000 years of our existence. Howard's book starts dealing with these larger issues of the human society, and I think it's just amazing. The information technology is one part, but it's a whole series of technological things that are going and creating an entirely different, qualitatively different world than the one that you were born into, even if you were just born recently.
Yeah.
I mean, the change is so rapid.
I just love technology.
Unprecedented.
I love technology, and I have, I have an iPhone. I have the iPad. I have an iMac. I edit all my films on an iMac. Apple is one of the most incredible companies that ever.
You do everything Apple, everything Mac.
Everything I can.
Yeah, everything. You don't have PC in your world at all? Okay.
I gave up. I used to have an old-fashioned computer, before I got my Apple. Everything about Apple is just cutting edge.
Yeah.
It is just so perfect.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. Among other, if I could go back up a little bit, because we're here in public access, right?
Yeah.
And we're honored to have you here because you're a legendary figure in all the world of communication.
Well, I've lived a long time.
You have indeed. And one of the people, we talked about the Canadian Film Board before, you're associated with that. And the name that's associated with this part of communication, which is called public access, we're here at Manhattan Neighborhood Network. It's part of a collection of maybe some 3,000 different entities across the United States of America called public access that is unique. And it's got down in the annals of that experience a person who was particularly instrumental in getting it all started in an institutionally significant way, and that was Mr. George Stoney. And you had a long-term association with him. I wonder if you could talk about George and the work that he did, and then also if we could talk a little bit about the significance of public access television, which is emerging now, and what do you think the future of it is, or what your curiosity might be. And I'm wondering if we could maybe enlist you to become interested in what we're about here.
Well, let's start with George.
Okay, yes.
In 1963, I was hired by a small company called the Center for Mass Communication at Columbia University.
Okay.
Center for Mass Communication, more commonly known as CMC, was an organization that started off, and I detailed this in my book, by the way, right after the war, the Public Health Service discovered that penicillin could cure syphilis.
It was a miracle. Yeah.
It was a
Penicillin
miracle
was a
because
miracle, yeah.
up until, in 1946, you couldn't say the word syphilis on radio or television.
It was a death knell, yeah.
Long story short, the Public Health Service came to Columbia because of the name Center for Mass Communication and said, we would like to do a mass communication campaign telling the public that syphilis can be cured. Can you help us?
Yeah.
Long story short, CMC created a song.
Okay.
You're going to love this.
Okay, well, just go ahead, find it.
Yeah. They created this song called That Ignorant Cowboy, and I can find it, I hope, very quickly here, going through page 64.
Okay. You're not exactly like one of those elders that has a hard time sending an email that there are so many of around. You seem to be in advance even of the kids, who seem to be very adroit with the wonders of the information technology. Have you found it now?
So this man wrote a song. And
which man now? Who are we talking
about? A man named Eric Barno, who was a colleague before I met George Stone. He wrote this song.
Now, has it got an image or something, or what?
I have a record. I'm going to play a little bit.
Okay.
It's now only 3 minutes, but I'm not going to play the whole thing. But listen to what was written and was played all over the country on jukeboxes.
Okay, on jukeboxes. Okay, keep it close to you so they can hear it.
An ignorant cowboy went out on a spree, and oh, what an ignorant cowhand was he. He had a few drinks and his head was a whirl, and he ended up in the arms of a girl called Katie. That ignorant cowboy, that ignorant cowboy. Now that cowboy was awfully handsome, they say, as I'm sure he could tell from his mirror each day. But many weeks later, one morning he saw a rash on his face, and he cried with a roar, "What is it?" That ignorant cowboy, that ignorant cowboy. That cowboy was worried and fretted and frowned, and he went to his medicine chest and he found some wonderful tonic that must have been hot, supposed to be good for whatever you got, and he took it. That ignorant cowboy, that ignorant cowboy. Now that cowboy each morning he washed at the sink, and then came one morning when, what do you think? The spots on his face, they had all gone away. He looked and he shouted, "Tie-yippee, tie-yay, I'm cured." That ignorant cowboy, that ignorant cowboy. That handsome young cowboy was happy once more, 'cause nobody ever had told him the score. But the germ that had got him was still there inside, 'cause this is a treacherous germ that will hide inside. An ignorant cowboy, an ignorant cowboy. Now, partners, it surely is sorrowful strange to think of that cowboy a-riding the range, not knowing someday he'll be surely struck down by the germ that he caught when he went up to town on a spree. That ignorant cowboy, that ignorant cowboy. Now a ranch on the range isn't likely to find much use for a cowboy who's dead, lame, or blind. So if you've known Katie, please listen to this. Only a doctor can cure syphilis. Don't be an ignorant cowboy, an ignorant cowboy, an ignorant cowboy, an ignorant cowboy.
All right, they don't make songs like that anymore.
Now, the thing about
That's not hip hop.
the thing about this is the story that goes with it, and I will tell you,
We're
this
demonstrating.
became so popular.
That was on jukeboxes.
This
and everything.
people were throwing nickels in jukeboxes by the thousands, and I'll read a little because the camera won't be able to see it.
Yeah.
Cowboy won its most spectacular successes in San Francisco, where, according to informal reports, jukeboxes wore out some 1,500 discs in a matter of weeks. This brought Dwight D. Eisenhower back into the situation.
Yeah.
Eisenhower was the president of Colombia at this moment.
Oh, right. That's
and
right.
so
he was
Eisenhower gets a letter.
That's before the presidency.
He was president of Colombia.
Yeah, right.
Before he became American
Right,
president.
right.
So Eisenhower gets a letter, and the letter is from a man in San Francisco who says, "You have to do something because my daughter Katie was just accepted at Barnard, and she can't go now because everybody is accusing her of giving syphilis to a cowboy."
Wow.
So,
That's where the song came. Yeah.
So Eric, who had created the song, was asked by Eisenhower to write a letter to this guy.
I'll be
Anyhow, the crucial part of this is that the rate of syphilis plummeted.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It was a
Absolutely,
miracle. Yeah,
because
miracle.
of this song and other programs they did.
And the existence of penicillin, which was another one was the polio vaccine.
Right.
Just saw it.
So,
Yeah.
anyhow, this is an example of how mass communications,
Absolutely.
can do massive things.
Now we came to this ignorant cowboy through talking about George Stoney.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
now.
I'm sorry, I got off the track.
Well, that's
on
all right, but it's a sidebar and it's
all right.
interesting.
So Stoney,
Yeah.
see what happened is when I was hired to be the manager of this organization.
Okay.
And that's when I met George.
Yeah.
Now George, this was 1963.
Okay.
And George was teaching at Columbia. He was teaching a film course, and up until then, my experiences had been in television and radio.
Yeah, right.
I was, in addition to being manager of CMC, Eric had asked me to be deputy chair of the film it was called the broadcasting department, and I was teaching
At NYU or what? No.
at Columbia.
At Columbia, uptown. Okay.
And
yeah.
so I was teaching television courses. Then I met George, and George was teaching film.
Down at NYU, I'll bet.
No, well, he hadn't gone there. He was still at Columbia.
I see. Okay.
So I took, the only film course I ever took in my life was a film course that George gave. And so I took this course, and that's when I began making film. So
he got you into it.
Yeah.
Well, he's a patron saint of public access in an institutionalized way.
So George was
understand,
starting
yeah.
public access then. Then he moved to NYU. And many years later, I moved to NYU. I became director of the film department at the School of Continuing
And you
Education.
grew that in huge proportion, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I helped make one of the finest film schools on the East Coast.
And it grew to huge budgets compared to what it was when you came in and so forth, if I saw in some work.
I quadrupled the department income. When I got there were 10 guys teach 10 people. I think there were some women, and giving one certificate in film. And when I left, there were 60. I hired 50 people in the years.
And increased the budget tremendously and helped be an inspiration for film to study.
Quadrupled the income, and instead of and I introduced video. There was no video at my department.
Video was just coming along. Who was it? I think it was
video started.
Peter Goldmark, I think, invented videotape, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Peter Goldmark invented video. And a man named
videotape, yeah.
A man named Kudelski, a Polish engineer living in Switzerland, invented the portable tape recorder when I was at RFA.
Really?
In 1955, one of our engineers came back, and he had this tape recorder. It wasn't much bigger than this, it was a little wider, and it was called the Nagra tape recorder. It was portable, and you had to wind it up. They didn't have batteries. And you could now record sound on location from the 50s on.
No, in video.
You could record, well, it was at first it was audio, and then of course became video.
Yeah, but in video, but I remember Peter Goldmark Sr., he invented that, and he had a secretary named Bonnie. I remember doing a program in his house one time, wonderful gentleman, but once you got to videotape, because all the archiving of the earlier stuff was a thing called kinescope, which was a film process.
Right.
We'd had film, and then there came video tape, which made possible what was called a portapack also, that came out industrially from Japan.
Well, the early videotape, it was 2 inches and it was reel to reel, and you wound it up.
Yeah, and the 2-inch high beam thing, they used to send off HBO and everything, would have to send those. They were like 35 millimeter canisters that they had to send to all their head ends across the country when cable started coming. And it all came. But George was doing that where he had the Red Burns. Did you know Red Burns? And they had
I knew her. She was at NYU. George is one of the grandfathers of public access.
Absolutely, and one of the major ones.
And he just died at the age of 96.
I was there at his picnic a couple of weeks before he passed. It was a sad thing. I loved George Stoney tremendously.
His, memorial service. I think he was 96.
He was 96.
95th birthday, which was downtown in Manhattan.
And so you were in touch with him and everything.
All the years.
Did you become interested in, or could we enlist you to be giving some attention to the significance of public access?
Well, I'd love to work with you guys.
We should try and enlist you to our ranks.
I would love to. I'd love to, because I grew up with television.
Yeah, you got the inside track on that. Too bad you don't know how to tell a story. If you were a little bit better, I'm making a joke. I mean, because you have these stories come out of you. You just say go, and there's just these stories that are incredibly interesting come out of your head.
When you make documentaries, you have to become a storyteller. That's what you do.
Yeah.
So I tell stories. I also run a series of documentary screenings, and if anybody's interested, email me and I can put you on a screening list, because
I've been to those. They're really interesting.
We have great films, and as a matter of fact, I showed one of George's films just a few months before he died. His film on the Weavers, I guess.
Okay,
made with Jim Brown.
Yeah, he made some beautiful films, and he did a very good job for the Franklin Roosevelt back in the 30s to educate people about the New Deal and to educate people on what was going on. And his films were very well done. They had an exhibit at NYU that we went to, and they played a number of them, like a retrospective. And I was surprised at the quality that he did very carefully. It was very carefully done. They were what do they call it? Teaching films, or something. It wasn't like Hollywood. But they had the quality of Hollywood productions in many cases. They're very carefully done and very artfully done. Yeah.
He's a master of his craft.
Yeah.
He made a film on Bob Flaherty. I was with George Stoney. He and I were on the Flaherty Foundation board. And Bob Flaherty made a film called Man of Aaron, and George went back to the Arid Islands and made a film, I think it was called How the Myth Was Made, about Flaherty, who spent a year on the Arid Islands.
And Flaherty was, of course, a Nanook of the North. And monumental.
Another genius. One of my favorite George Stoney stories is he was making a film on stroke for the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. And he used to show this in class, and I loved it. So you see this elderly woman in a, this was, I think, in black and white, it was so long ago. You see this elderly woman in a home situation, and she's walking on the floor, walking across her room, and she suddenly collapses. And she's lying on the ground. Presumably she had a stroke. And and George didn't cut the
no, it was
camera.
verite.
He continued, the camera was shooting. And after a while she looks up and she says, "Was that all right, Mr. Stoney?" You know, people, Jean-Luc Godard said film is truth 24 times a second. The most ridiculous statement that was ever made, because if there's anything that's not true, it's film.
You bet a young man, Nat Wood, who's one of the gang here, producing programs. You know, one of the he's got a program called 30 frames a second, because the television's moving at 30 frames a second.
It's against 24.
Against 24, that's a different kind of thing. But the public access has been going since about, in a serious kind of way. I guess it's been, the growth of the cable came. Cable's really been a big influence in terms of distribution over the networks. The networks are limited in the number of over-the-air broadcasting. The physics of over-the-air broadcasting can only permit so much within a given market area and so forth. But cable came with multi-channel capacity.
Well, it's bandwidth,
It's bandwidth, and then that fit nicely with what was coming down the pike, hardly noticed and everything. The whole thing that was going to be coming digital, and the whole internet, and the whole matter of that nested very nicely with cable. In terms of, we got 1,900 channels now that they have on the local cable system in New York.
And the whole visual or communications spectrum is changing so rapidly. For instance, one of the big problems for me is I can't stand a film where in the middle of, you know, a dramatic moment, up pops a commercial.
But you're living in the wrong universe now for what exists.
So now you can go to places like Netflix.
Yes, that's true.
And you can see stuff without the commercial. I'm hooked on a series called Doc Martin. Have you seen Doc?
I've seen that. Yeah, that's over. Right.
It's a British.
It's British.
It's British. It's a
BBC still puts out good stuff, don't they?
Well, this happens to be terrific. I'm in the middle of the series now, and there's this kind of irascible doctor who can't stand the sight of blood, so he gives up surgery in London, and he goes to this little town in Cornwall where he's a GP. And of course there are no commercials. You watch an hour-long program with no interruption.
You can see that on public television. You get some ads at the beginning. They begin to look like ads on some of that public television. Nova series, Frontline, these kind of things. You get quality programming.
Well, PBS and
PBS,
public access, and you guys who are doing the best kind of work around.
Well, it's a public access. It's cable. Then came Ted Turner and started up the CNN about 1980 or so. That was a major thing. He brought the baseball from Atlanta and that PBS, and then they went, and it's just been galloping ever since. And then one of the things that emerged along about 1970, which was a very feisty time on this planet. There was a lot going on, Vietnam, and there was a lot of input from civil society, and the cable industry were building out seriously. I think about 10% of the country was cabled by 1970, but there seems to be a major break point. And that's when things started going into high gear, and that's when first the structure between the cable industry, which Lord Beaverbrook in England could see. You're going to have a cable come into the home or institution with data and programming. There was a license to print money, as Lord Beaverbrook could see. They were going to make a lot of money, but they agreed to set aside 5%, in principle, 5% of their net of tax earnings for PEG, public, educational, and governmental. And the public and the educational fit into the normal dialectic of public sector, profit, corporate, private sector, tax and spend, regulate kind of thing. And there was input from like George Stoney and that. And they set this aside and adhered to it. So the franchising agreement was made to where they set aside real money to set up a facility for two things. One was the PEG, and the public in PEG is here. And so you get some real money to get some really good equipment that makes it possible for that to be made available to the public. That's very unique. I mean, Mr. Paley had no such obligation when he set up his, or Mr. Sarnoff. But they did. And the only other thing that's supported that way by the cable industry is C-SPAN. And C-SPAN is another place where you can repair and find really interesting, intellectually interesting, and politically interesting programming that Brian Lamb set up.
Yeah, and I think that was a terrific setup. And one of the things I detest and deplore, however, is the way the networks, in their greed, the networks originally, and cable too now, because of their greed, are allowing networks to make billions of dollars from political payments for at every 4 years when we have an election.
Yeah,
I remember when I
billion literally. There was both Obama and Mr. Romney did $1 billion.
I worked at NBC in the early 50s. In 1952, I covered the two political conventions when Dwight Eisenhower was running against Adlai Stevenson.
I remember,
Now, prior to that, we had given airtime to politicians free. The airwaves belong to the public. That's what the FCC says, and that's what everybody believes. But the greedy owners of the networks, who had to increase their money, decided to charge politicians who wanted to buy airtime instead of getting it free.
Sure.
Airtime should be free.
Well, you think that's the way it should be done, right?
Of course it should.
Right,
of course. But the FCC is too cowardly.
Well, FCC, and now they've set up the Citizens United, which makes it possible for real big money to come in with no accounting for it at all. That was a Supreme Court decision that a lot of people are trying to
and the airwaves
revisit, and perhaps there's a move to amend that is a Supreme Court decision.
So this is so lopsided, our political scene now, that you have to be a billionaire to spend an enormous amount of money to run for a small office.
Right, even a small
terrible.
office. Yeah.
It is terrible for the nation.
Yeah. I suppose there's always been a few people run things. There were only a few emperors in Rome. And then we had the crowned heads of Europe for 1,000 years ruled, and that was how political legitimacy was established. Just a few people. Most of the people were wallowing around in the mud.
But it's not fair.
It's not. It never has been fair, though, has it?
I know, but
are we getting to a time where it has never been fair? It's always been a matter of few ruling over the mass who were very poverty-struck serfs.
It's the golden rule. He who has the gold rules.
Yeah, I know, and all of the notions of realpolitik, where the things are run by the strong, and the weak are multitudes of people that have no say or anything. Do you think we're coming to a time of a qualitative, not just a quantitative historical change? From feudalism to what happened in the United States of America in 1776, that kind of thing, historically. But we're coming to a time where the technological or the evolutionary process itself is making possible a world where, let's just say idealistically, every single citizen would be able to realize their full given potential to develop all of the capabilities they have that are so restricted by the horrible poverty that so many people have to suffer and so forth. With that, we may be coming to a qualitative change of liberation or an end time.
I would love to see a time come
when
a person could be elected without spending a penny.
Would
A
you like to
person to be elected on the quality of his mind or her mind, the quality, the integrity of the person, not how many rich friends he has.
Well, okay, I agree with you. I wonder if that could be expanded to where everybody could be doing the full measure of their own inclination and capability without ever having to think about money.
Wouldn't that be great?
Wouldn't that be wonderful? That would seem to be in the minds of many. That's public access. This public access makes possible to the citizen making serious programming with serious equipment, and distributing it. Everything is streamed, and it's all done in a way where they don't have to. The producer doesn't have to think about money at all.
What an ideal world.
No, that's a small window of an ideal that has, I think, resonancy to the future, because I think the demands of the exponential increase in capability is going to lead to a thing where we're going to get to something to where people will be able to think that way just routinely rather than that. But in the minds of many people, it's absolutely against the laws of the universe, whether you have a God or not, that you can do anything without being only concerned about money, because that's the only thing that motivates practically the entire political and economic system of all of our institutions we've inherited out of a world that maybe the technological development is making a new world completely and qualitatively different than that which is in the past. And let's hope it isn't one that allows us to unleash the weapons that have existed as one part of technology extension, to which have become, apparently from the modeling, species lethal. This is a time of qualitative. Occam raises qualitative, not quantitative transformation. And you've been in on all of this, and we're going to try and enlist you to help us over here to get this done right.
Well,
in public access.
And I hear
we only got a couple minutes left.
I hear you are now going to high definition, so
this is all done high definition.
Isn't that great?
It's all being moved to high definition.
It's a big step forward.
And it's making room for people of all stripes. Like I said, you can just have like a junior high school pageant that doesn't have it. You know, there's not chasing the Nielsen or money. But that's a dream that people have held, and it may be becoming real. And public access is one. And just one quick thing, the cable industry, go to those associations, there's any human organization, there are people all the way from visionaries, Ted Turner, Brian Lamb, they're visionaries, to bean counters who are just looking business. And whoever it is, they all count in the jewel in their crown as C-SPAN. And C-SPAN is the only other thing that is supported by the cable industry. Cable industry should come and support fulsomely public access. And I think it's likely to happen. They will fulsomely support it rather than perhaps niggardly, as a lot of people wanted to do. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that could become something that would be in PR value terms, you understand that, to the cable industry against the other competitors, the support of public access fulsomely across the country. Because
and you guys are doing great work.
The people here are, but what we need is somebody with some seasoned experience and so forth to come in and give us some good advice. Who might that be? Who might be able to come? There's this guy I hear of. His name is Sumner.Jules Glimcher, and I'm hoping maybe we'll be able to enlist your services in this good endeavor. Do you think there's any chance?
I'd be delighted to help you in any way I can.
Pleasure, my friend. So good to you, and the audience, welcome very much. It's been a pleasure welcoming this gentleman who is a raconteur, as you can see. And I'll tell you, it's just like that. You could talk for hours. You just say talk. And you're coming up with stories that are amazingly revealing of your very interesting life that continues so rich and everything, richly. And I thank you very, very much for that and coming in. And look forward to more and more of a connection between us. And people could be in touch with you about those films you show. That's at the institution over on 86th Avenue.
The National Academy of Television.
That's the Emmy people, is it not? Yeah.
Write to them, National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, and come to my screenings. I show a different documentary every month.
I think we got up how they could be in touch with you with email.